Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are heading west, and I don't just mean geographically. We are heading straight into the thick of the American frontier mythos.
We really are.
We're talking about a figure so iconic that her name is practically a synonym for the Wild West itself. You've definitely seen the movies, you've heard the songs.
Yeah.
Martha Jane Canary.
But of course, no one knows her by that name.
No. You know her better as Calamity Jane.
It really is a name that just conjures up a very specific, very vivid image, doesn't it?
Oh, instantly.
You immediately picture the buckskins, the Winchester rifle in hand, riding alongside Wild Bill Hickok, maybe, tossing back a shot of whiskey in a dusty Deadwood saloon.
Right.
It's the ultimate cowgirl rebel archetype.
Exactly. She's the prototype for every, tough girl character in Western fiction. But here's the thing, and this is why I was so excited to dig into these sources with you today.
Mm-hmm.
The gap between the legend of Calamity Jane and the actual life of Martha Jane Canary is, well, it's about the size of the Grand Canyon.
It is.
And frankly, the reality is a lot darker, grittier, and way more complex than the dime novels ever let on.
That is the perfect way to frame it. And navigating that gap is so tricky because Jane herself was the primary architect of all the confusion.
She was her own PR agent.
100%. She was a storyteller, a relentless self-promoter, and just, a bit of a chaotic force. She dictated her own legend while she was still alive, which means a lot of what we know about her comes from publicity stunts designed to sell tickets.
So our mission for this deep dive is to peel back those layers of fiction. We have stacks of historical records, census data, contemporary newspaper reports, and my personal favorite, her own 1896 autobiographical booklet.
Ah, yes, the pamphlet.
Which, having read through it, I think we can charitably describe as creative nonfiction.
That is a very, very polite way of putting it. It's basically a superhero origin story she wrote for herself.
Right.
But today, we are going to look past that. We're going to look at the daredevil scout and the heartbroken lover she claimed to be, and contrast that with the reality of a woman who struggled with severe alcoholism, poverty, and just the brutal hardships of the frontier. We want to find the human being underneath the buckskins.
Let's start right at the beginning, because despite all the legends of her being born in a saddle or sprouting from the ground fully armed with a six-shooter, she had a childhood. And looking at the census data, it wasn't a charmed life.
Not at all. It was a childhood defined almost immediately by misfortune. She was born Martha Jane Canary on May 1st, 1852, in Princeton, Missouri.
And she even fudged that, right, in her own pamphlet.
Oh, yeah. She claims she was born later to make herself seem younger. It's a classic celebrity move, but the records are clear. She was the eldest of 6 children.
And the family dynamic she was born into seems pretty unstable from the jump.
Extremely. Her father, Robert Wilson Canary, he had a known gambling problem. Her mother, Charlotte, had 6 kids to manage. And like so many families in the mid-19th century, they got caught up in that post-Civil War westward hoe fever.
Right. Go west.
In 1865, they packed up a wagon train and headed for Montana.
And I think it's easy for us, sitting here in comfort, to just gloss over what heading to Montana by wagon actually meant in 1865.
Oh, yeah.
We picture a scenic road trip, maybe we think about playing the Oregon Trail video game.
Right, but the reality was just grueling. It was months of walking, dust, disease, and real danger. And for Martha Jane, it was the beginning of the end of her childhood. Her mother, Charlotte, she died of pneumonia along the way in Blackfoot, Montana.
Oh, wow. On the trail.
On the trail. So they finally arrive in Virginia City in 1866, motherless. Robert, the father, takes the 6 kids on to Salt Lake City, supposedly to start farming. But within a year, by 1867, he's dead too.
So let's just pause and really look at that picture. By 1867, Martha Jane is 14 years old.
Just 14.
Both of her parents are dead. And she is suddenly the matriarch of a family of 5 younger siblings in a territory that is incredibly unforgiving.
It is a nightmare scenario. At 14, she didn't have the luxury of grieving or, being a teenager. She was the head of the household.
Immediately.
And this is the crucial turning point. This is where the Calamity Jane grit is forged. She loaded up their wagon herself and moved the entire family to Fort Bridger, Wyoming, and then on to Piedmont.
That level of responsibility is just staggering. How does a 14-year-old girl even support a family of 6 in 1860s Wyoming? The economy wasn't exactly overflowing with opportunities for young women.
She did whatever was necessary. And this is where we see her start to break those Victorian gender norms, not necessarily out of a desire to be a social rebel or to make a statement,
but out of sheer survival.
Out of sheer survival. The sources list her jobs during this period: dishwasher, cook, waitress, dance hall girl, nurse. But those jobs didn't pay well enough.
Not to support 5 other kids?
No. So she shifts. She starts working as an ox team driver.
Driving oxen? That's heavy, dangerous labor.
Yeah.
I mean, you're wrestling with massive animals dragging freight through mud.
It is. And by 1874, she's claiming to work as a scout at Fort Russell. And this is when she begins wearing men's attire regularly.
See, that's such an interesting distinction. In the movies, she wears pants because she's a tomboy or an action hero. But you're saying it started just because she was doing men's work to survive.
Precisely. I mean, think about it. Long Victorian skirts are a massive safety hazard when you're driving oxen or navigating rough terrain or riding horses all day. It's just practical.
I think that makes sense.
She was living a rough outdoor existence. The sources also mention she likely worked as a prostitute occasionally at the Fort Laramie 3-mile hog ranch.
So it paints a picture of a young woman using every single tool at her disposal. Her strength, her appearance, her labor, to keep herself and her siblings alive in just a brutal environment.
Right. She wasn't playing a character yet. She was just trying to survive.
So she's tough. She's undeniably resilient. But at some point, she transitions from Martha Jane, the hardworking orphan, to Calamity Jane, the legend. Everyone loves a good superhero origin story, and Jane certainly wrote a great one for herself.
She certainly did. If you believe her 1896 pamphlet, the name was bestowed upon her in a moment of glorious heroism that rivals anything in a blockbuster movie.
I love this story, even if it's fake. Lay it out for us.
So Jane claims this happened during the Indian campaigns of 1872 or 73 near Goose Creek, Wyoming. She says she was with a detachment under a Captain Egan and they were ambushed.
Okay.
Captain Egan is shot and starts reeling in his saddle, about to fall off and likely be killed.
And Jane creates the cinematic moment.
Right. She claims she turned her horse, galloped back into the line of fire, caught the captain just before he hit the ground, and pulled him onto her horse to safety.
Very dramatic.
And supposedly, once they got back to the fort and the captain recovered, he laughingly told her, "I name you Calamity Jane, the heroine of the plains."
I name you Calamity Jane, the heroine of the plains. It's so profound, it rhymes, it's catchy, it's perfect branding.
It's a great line.
Is there any truth to it?
It is highly unlikely.
I figured as much. The rhyme is just a little too convenient.
The historical record pushes back on this quite hard. A contemporary of hers named Captain Jack Crawford, who actually served under Generals Crook and Miles, the generals Jane claimed to serve with.
Okay, so a credible source.
A very credible source. He gave a pretty scathing rebuttal in a 1904 interview. He claimed Jane never saw service under those generals, never fought Indians, and never even saw lynching. He called her simply a notorious character, dissolute and devilish.
Ouch. Dissolute and devilish. That's a far cry from heroine of the plains.
It is.
So if Captain Egan didn't christen her after a daring rescue, where did the name come from?
There is a more grounded, more psychological theory mentioned in the sources.
Which I feel is probably closer to the truth.
I think so, too. It suggested that the nickname came from her warning men that to offend her was to court calamity.
That honestly sounds much more in character for someone surviving in mining camps. You know, like, don't mess with me or it'll be a calamity. It's a defense mechanism.
Exactly. It's armor. It's a warning. And we know the name stuck early on. By July 1876, when she arrived in Deadwood, the local newspaper, the Black Hills Pioneer,
Ran a headline.
they ran a headline, "Calamity Jane has arrived." So the brand was already established regardless of the origin. She walked into town as a celebrity.
You mentioned Deadwood, and you simply cannot talk about Calamity Jane and Deadwood without talking about the other half of that legendary duo,
Wild Bill Hickok.
Wild Bill Hickok. This is maybe the most persistent myth in the entire American West. This idea that Jane and Wild Bill were lovers, or secret spouses or soulmates.
It's the great romance of the frontier.
I mean, in the Doris Day movie, they end up getting married, don't they? It's the ultimate power couple fantasy, the king and queen of the Wild West.
It is, but the historical reality is just much, much colder. The sources are very clear on this. They were acquaintances.
Just acquaintances.
That's it. They met in 1876 at Fort Laramie and joined the same wagon train to Deadwood. But they weren't longtime partners. And in fact, Hickok had famously just married another woman, Agnes Thatcher Lake, right before he headed to Deadwood.
So he was a newlywed when he met Jane.
He was.
But wait, I've definitely heard about a diary
Huh.
and a daughter. Wasn't there a woman in the 1940s who came forward claiming to be their child? I feel like I've seen this referenced in documentaries.
Yes, this is the McCormick claim, and it is a fascinating rabbit hole of, well, fraud. In 1941, a woman named Jean Hickok Burkhart McCormick applied for old age assistance. To prove her identity, she produced a Bible signed by ministers and a whole bundle of letters,
Letters from Calamity Jane.
allegedly written by Calamity Jane to her daughter Jean.
And I'm guessing in these letters, Jane confesses her undying love for Bill.
You got it. The letters claimed Jane and Bill were married in Montana in 1873 and that Jean was born that same year. They were very emotional, very poetic letters explaining why she had to give the baby up for adoption.
And it convinced some people.
It did at the time, but when historians really looked closer, the whole thing just fell apart.
How so? Was it the timeline?
The timeline was messy, yes. Jane was supposedly scouting somewhere else during the time of the alleged birth, but the real smoking gun is the literacy issue.
Right, we talked about her upbringing, driving oxen, constantly moving. She wouldn't have had a formal education. Could she even write?
The consensus among series historians is that Jane was functionally illiterate. Census records confirm this.
And her own autobiography that we talked about.
It was dictated to someone else. And get this, in the pamphlet, her last name is spelled Canary with 2 N's. Her father's census records use 1 N. If she couldn't even spell her own name consistently, she certainly wasn't writing long, poetic, introspective letters to a secret daughter.
That really seals it. It's a complete hoax. But stepping back from the Wild Bill fantasy for a second, did she have children at all? Or was that part entirely made up too?
No, she did have children. The sources say she had possibly 2, maybe even 4 children, but the fathers are all unknown. And there's a heartbreaking story that really illustrates her struggle with motherhood. It's much more telling than any of the fake romance letters.
This is the benefit night story, right?
Yes. So in the late 1880s, Jane returns to Deadwood with a child, a little girl. And she wanted the girl to get a good education at a Catholic boarding school nearby.
Okay, so a good intention.
The great intention. And the town, despite knowing Jane's rough edges and her drinking, they pitched in. They held a benefit at a local theater and raised a large sum of money for the tuition.
That's a beautiful community moment. They wanted to help her break the cycle.
It starts that way. But that same night, Jane took a portion of that money, got incredibly drunk, and spent it. The next day, she packed up the child and just left town.
Oh, wow. That's tragic. It really just highlights the instability she was living with.
It does. A local woman who wrote about it, Esteline Bennett, she didn't think Jane was trying to scam them. She really believed Jane honestly wanted that education for her daughter, but she couldn't curb her impulses or execute a long-term plan.
It's a classic sign of the addiction she was battling.
Exactly. It shows a woman who wants to be a mother, who has these good intentions, but is just completely consumed by her demons.
It's so interesting because you have this notorious dissolute character who fails at these domestic things, who drinks away her daughter's tuition. But then you have these other stories that paint her as a saint.
Right.
We have to talk about the smallpox epidemic.
Yeah.
Because this seems to be the one thing everyone agrees on.
This is the heroine of the pest house chapter of her life, and unlike the marriage to Hickok, this one is completely verified by locals.
Set the scene for us. Why was this such a big deal?
Okay, so late 1870s, Deadwood. A smallpox outbreak hits the camp. Now, you have to understand, in the 1870s, smallpox was terrifying.
Yeah, it was a death sentence for many.
Absolutely. It wasn't just a sickness. It was highly contagious, disfiguring, and often fatal. When someone got sick, they were usually quarantined in what they called a pest house, basically a shack on the edge of town, and just ignored. People were too afraid to go near them.
It's the ultimate isolation.
Exactly. Except for Jane. She stepped up. She nursed the victims, she stayed with them in the pest house, she cleaned them, fed them, administered whatever medicine they had.
And this wasn't for glory. This was dirty, dangerous work.
Incredibly dangerous. And it showcased this massive, generous streak that made the locals forgive so many of her drunken escapades. She might, shoot up a saloon sign one night, but she would hold a dying man's hand the next.
That is a fascinating duality. It's like she had this immense capacity for care, even if she couldn't consistently care for herself.
Yeah.
There's also the story about the stagecoach rescue. This one feels like an action movie again, like the Goose Creek story. Does this one hold water?
It does, and it's corroborated. There was an overland stagecoach being pursued by Plains Indians. The driver, a man named John Slaughter, was shot and killed.
So the coach is out of control.
It's careening out of control, passengers inside screaming. Jane, who was apparently nearby or on the coach, she grabbed the reins, settled the horses, and drove the passengers to safety in Deadwood.
See, these are the moments where the legend feels earned. She really was capable of immense bravery.
Absolutely. And I think that's why the myth took root so strongly. If she was just a drunk storyteller, she would have been forgotten. But she had these genuine moments of competence and compassion that grounded all the wilder tales. It gave people a reason to root for her.
So we have the peak years, Deadwood, 1876 to the late 70s. She's famous, she's a local character, but the frontier started closing. The Wild West started getting, well, tamed.
Right.
Railroads, laws, fences. What happens to a person like Calamity Jane when civilization catches up?
The later years, sadly, were just a long, slow decline. This is section 5 of our dive, and it's really tough to read. She had a serious case of wanderlust. In 1881, she bought a ranch in Montana, tried to run an inn.
And that failed.
It failed. She moved to Boulder, tried innkeeping again, failed again. She allegedly married a man named Clinton Burke, but that didn't stabilize her either.
She just couldn't settle down. It's like she wasn't built for a quiet life.
No. And as she got older, she realized her name was her only real asset. She became a celebrity commodity. In 1893, she appeared in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show.
That sounds glamorous, though. Traveling with Buffalo Bill, playing to packed crowds.
It sounds glamorous to us, but for her, it was often humiliating. She wasn't a star, she was a curiosity. She was hired as a storyteller, basically to go out and be Calamity Jane for the tourists.
Performing a caricature of herself.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. She sold that autobiographical booklet we mentioned at dime museums. But the reality was, she was often poor, and her alcoholism was getting much, much worse. She was selling the myth of her youth to pay for the addiction of her middle age.
The source material has a specific anecdote about a horse rental in Cheyenne that's, I mean, it's funny in a slapstick way, but also really indicative of how bad her problem had become.
The joyride incident. Yeah, this actually happened a bit earlier, but it really sets the pattern for her chaotic relationship with alcohol and travel. She rented a horse and buggy in Cheyenne for a 1-mile drive to Fort Russell and back.
No, just a quick trip. 1 mile, hard to mess that up.
Or so you'd think. She got so drunk, she completely passed her destination. She didn't stop until she hit Fort Laramie.
Wait. I'm looking at a map. Fort Laramie is not close to Cheyenne.
It's about 90 miles.
She overshot her 1-mile trip by 90 miles.
That is the level of chaos we are talking about. Imagine being so intoxicated you miss your turn and end up 3 counties over.
Wow.
And as she aged, the body just couldn't take that anymore. By 1901, she's at the Pan American Exposition, but by 1903, she's back in the Black Hills, and she's dying penniless.
What was she doing for money at the very end, if the shows were over?
She was cooking and doing laundry for the girls at Dora Dufran's brothel.
Wow.
The heroine of the plains, the woman who claimed to scout for generals, was washing sheets in a brothel to earn her keep. It's just a stark, sad image.
It is. And then comes the end, August 1st, 1903.
She was on an ore train to Terry, South Dakota. She drank heavily on board, fell ill, and the conductor actually had to carry her off the train. She died shortly after at the Callaway Hotel. The cause was inflammation of the bowels and pneumonia.
And she was only 51.
Just 51 years old.
That's so young, even for then.
Yeah. But her story doesn't end with her death.
Hmm.
We have to talk about the burial.
Yeah.
Because she is buried at Mount Moriah Cemetery, right next to Wild Bill Hickok.
Yes, if you go there today, you see them, side by side.
And for a century, people have looked at those two graves and sighed romantically. Together at last.
Yeah.
It validates the whole love story.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting and really cynical. This is what I call the final joke.
Go on. Because this changes everything about that cemetery visit.
So the romantic version is that it was her dying wish to be buried next to the man she loved. And the Society of Black Hills Pioneers organized it to honor her wish. But 4 of the men who planned that funeral later admitted the real truth about why they put her there.
They said that Wild Bill Hickok had, and this is a quote, absolutely no use for Jane when he was alive.
He couldn't stand her.
He found her annoying, loud, and uncouth. So these men decided to bury her next to him as a posthumous prank on Wild Bill.
No way.
Yes. They basically said, let's bury her here so she can annoy him for all eternity.
That is dark. That is Wild West humor at its absolute darkest. So the greatest romantic symbol of the frontier is actually a trolling attempt by her funeral committee.
Essentially, they were playing a practical joke on a dead man. But, regardless of the motive, the turnout for her funeral was massive. The church overflowed.
How people did care.
They did. You had the morbidly curious, sure, but you also had old friends. Despite the drinking, despite all the lies, she meant something to that community. She was a piece of their history.
And she became a piece of our history, too. Section 7 of our outline covers her pop culture afterlife. And man, has she had a lot of lives. It seems like every generation just reinvents her.
It started before she even died. The Deadwood Dick dime novels in 1877 established her as a heroine. And she had no input on these stories, but the public just began to conflate the fictional superhero with the real woman.
And then Hollywood got a hold of her.
And the biggest shift was in 1953, Calamity Jane, the musical starring Doris Day.
Whip crack away. I grew up watching that movie.
Exactly. And that film portrays her as this sunny, singing, buckskin-wearing tomboy who, cleans up nice and marries Wild Bill. It is almost entirely fictional.
It completely scrubs away the reality.
Completely. It scrubs away the alcohol, the poverty, the children, the tragedy. It turns her into a Disney princess with a gun.
And then you swing the pendulum all the way to the other side with HBO's Deadwood.
Robin Weigert's portrayal. And that is probably the closest we'll ever get to the real Jane on screen.
Right.
She's gritty, she's filthy, she's an alcoholic, she's emotionally damaged, but she has this fierce loyalty. She's not singing songs. She's barely holding it together.
It's amazing to see that range.
Wow.
She's in Fallout video games. She's referenced in Fortnite. She's in songs by Big and Rich. She's just everywhere.
She is. And what's so fascinating is how the fictional Jane completely swallowed the real one. Most people don't know about the laundry or the orphan she had or the smallpox nursing. They know the caricature. They know the buckskins.
So, bringing this all together, we have a woman who was illiterate but is famous for writing letters. A wife of Wild Bill who was actually just an acquaintance buried next to him as a joke.
Or rough drunk who nursed the dying. She is a study in duality. She represents the freedom of the West, but also the tragedy of it. She broke every single rule for how a woman was supposed to behave in the 19th century. She wore pants, she drank whiskey, she drove oxen, but she paid a very, very steep price for that freedom.
It makes you wonder, if she hadn't become Calamity, would she have even survived?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it? Did she survive the West by becoming a scout? Or did she survive history by becoming a story? The persona she crafted, and had crafted for her, ultimately consumed Martha Jane Canary. But without that persona, without the lies and the dime novels, we wouldn't be talking about her 120 years later.
A survival strategy that worked a little too well.
Indeed.
That's going to do it for this deep dive into the life and legend of Calamity Jane. We hope you look at those old Western photos a little differently now.
There's always more to the story.
Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.